Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started and people will keep coming in as we continue. Um, Thank you everyone for joining today's rescheduled webinar on reducing supply chain GHG emissions. I'm Thane Cockram. I am a senior project manager at CSWA, and I'll be kicking off the um, discussion today. If I can forward my screen. Let's see. There, okay. This is our agenda. I'm going to kick off with a little bit of background on CSWA's efforts around climate action, and then we'll hear from Olga Kachook, the Director of Sustainable Packaging Coalition. And then we have Gita Mallya from Domaine Carneros, who is going to tell us about their packaging reuse program. And then we'll end our discussion with Kristin Belair from Honig, Vineyard, and Winery. She's going to tell us about Honig's practices around Scope 3 emissions. We'll save some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. But if you have a question as we're moving through the presentation today, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat. I have my colleague Lisa Francioni waiting in the wings to address any questions that come up, and if appropriate, she'll interrupt us to answer anything that is pertinent at that point. So to kick things off, we're going to look at this winery carbon footprint. And today we're going to be focusing on the left side of this wheel. This is a study that was done in 2011 by Wine Institute. It was looked at recently as well to see if any of the numbers should be updated, and discovered that it still holds true in 2026 that about 50% of the winery's a wine's carbon footprint comes from the packaging and distribution side of its creation. So this can seem very daunting that 50% of our carbon footprint in this industry comes from this, but it also creates a lot of opportunity to move that needle with our Scope 3 emissions. So what do we mean when we say Scope 3 emissions? So this graphic here walks us through that. And Scope 1, when we say Scope 1, these are our direct emissions that come from the activities under our company's control. Scope 2 is all the purchased electricity from your operation. And Scope 3, that we'll focus on today, these are indirect emissions from your supply chain. These are your purchased products, your outsourced transportation, business travel related to your organization, and also what happens to your product at the end of its life. And you'll hear from Olga about the disposal end of life part of your wine. When we talk about climate action, there are two types of practices that come into play. One is adaptation, which treats the symptoms of climate impacts, and then the other is mitigation, which sort of treats the causes. So adaptation can be your winery responding to regulatory issues that arise. On the mitigation side, it could be your choices that you've made in what type of electricity you purchase, or your bottling decisions, and whether or not you have electrified your transportation. And we'll talk a lot about mitigation practices today as well. To address these mitigation adaptation practices as part of sustainability, CSWA had a 3-year grant to create a climate action toolkit. So we created this interactive toolkit that gives us information on why climate action is needed, why we're even doing this. It gives you an overview of terms and concepts. If you're brand new to this, this is a great place to start. It offers guidance on developing a plan to address climate impacts. And then we have a bundle of resources and tools to help you implement those practices. The toolkit is set up in a very easy to use process. We have a step 1, 2, and 3 for the user. The first is learning just about climate impacts in general and why you need to take action. Step 2 is assessing your operation and creating a plan. And then 3 is the implementation phase. It's taking what you learned and created in steps 1 and 2 and putting it into action. We have 3 buckets for the user to look through. One is the vineyard, one is the winery, and one is the supply chain. So today we're going to focus on that supply chain side. We have the categories of sustainable purchasing and suppliers that you will go to learn about purchasing decisions and why you should be making some movement in that area. This will help you with your Scope 3 emissions reductions. And then in that bucket, we also have a load of resources and tools that we've created that also live on our resource library. CSWA has a very robust online resource for people to use. It is has various different topics and users, vineyards, wineries, trade, and consumers are all users that the library is designed for. If you type in the keyword sustainable purchasing, you're going to get a suite of resources from the implementation guide to a policy purchasing template that you could use for your operation to create a purchasing policy if that is something that you would like to do. We also have this great supplier questionnaire. For anyone that's new to this that has never engaged a supplier, that may seem like a very awkward and daunting conversation to have, but hopefully this questionnaire will help guide you through those conversations. And then we have this wonderful packaging fact sheet that helps you consider alternative eco-friendly packaging for some of your wine products. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Olga Kachook, and she is going to take it over from here. So I'm going to stop share.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Let me just pull up the slides I was going to share and get them up for you. So as Thane said, I am from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. And if you're not familiar with us, we are a membership-based organization, a program of a nonprofit called Green Blue. And we run a couple of different programs related to materials and sustainable packaging. I represent the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, but another sister program of ours is the How to Recycle, Unpack, Disposal Instruction program. So you might have seen this on items that you buy at the grocery store. There's, over, I don't even know how many SKUs now across all sorts of industries that have the How to Recycle label on them, including wine. So I'll talk a little bit more about the label and the role of labeling in reducing packaging emissions, but we'll start with just another quick little overview of what kinds of companies engage with us and who is in our membership between the two programs. Over 1,400 member companies, from brands and retailers that you shop with and are familiar with, to some of the very large packaging manufacturers and converters that you might also be familiar with if you are working with these as suppliers sourcing your packaging. And then, of course, the rest of the industry, including government and consultants and universities. So a big tent for everyone who is interested in sustainable packaging. And if you'd like to join us, definitely reach out to me and I can share a little bit more about that. But to move on to the topic for today, my goal is to tell you a little bit about the change that's happened when it comes to packaging in the last really handful of years, and what you need to know about this change to move forward as you're looking at your portfolio and thinking about sustainability and some of those Scope 3 emissions that Thane talked about. And I loved the percentage that you guys have, that fact, the 30% or so of packaging that makes up a typical footprint. And that's so important to, one, have as a reference point, and two, that the number is quite large, because that gives you a lot of leverage for thinking about packaging and then actually making changes. In some cases, for other industries, packaging really is a very small part of their overall carbon footprint, but with you guys in the wine industry, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement when you make changes to your packaging. And what you'll see, the big theme for the change that's been happening in the sustainable packaging space, is that it's moved from what's represented on the left with sort of your sustainability commitments and environmental intent and sort of the goals that companies set and the overall like mission to be a more sustainable organization, to compliance, which doesn't sound very thrilling, but it actually is a huge shift and a huge lever for you all in thinking about how to make the case for packaging changes in your organization. So what do I mean by this shift to compliance? Well, there are several major regulations that are affecting packaging, and many of them come from the state of California specifically, but many of these are also national in scope. So some of you might be familiar with a law that was passed a couple of years ago now in California called SB 54, and it is essentially the state's extended producer responsibility program. What it means is that producers, so those who make and sell products in California, are now responsible for paying into a system that offsets the cost of managing packaging waste. So depending on what the volume of product that they sell and the type of packaging that you use, your fees are sort of calculated based on those two things. And then those fees go into a broader pot of money run by the Producer Responsibility Organization. And that money is used to, or will be used to fund further recycling, collection, and infrastructure programs in California. So there's a lot more to that bill. I just tried to sum it up in a nutshell, but that is really sort of the gorilla in the room when it comes to the compliance that is on the table now. A couple of years ago, sustainability for packaging was entirely voluntary, and that is no longer the case. As a producer, you have to comply with this law, and you have to meet the targets that are set out in that law. So I'll talk about those in a little bit more specificity in just a second. But there are also other types of laws, including recycled content mandates. So California has a bill, many other states have bills as well that require a certain amount of recycled content in packaging, especially in beverage as a category is often explicitly called out as an area where they expect fairly high levels of recycled content. So that's another kind of group of packaging bills or packaging regulation that companies have to comply with now. And then the last one that I'll mention is labeling requirements. So this is another very big and important bill that came out of California. It's called SB 343, and it essentially prohibits companies from making on-pack recyclability claims that haven't been substantiated with further evidence. So if you think of the many times that you've seen a little chasing arrows symbol on a package, the phrase please recycle or recyclable, none of those kinds of phrases or symbols are allowed now as a result of 343. What is allowed is claims that have been third-party verified or claims that you are able to provide data on. So you need to be able to say, yes, we have done our homework. We can prove that this package is in fact recyclable, and here's the evidence. But if you're just kind of slapping on the recycling, the recycling logo or general statements about recyclability, that is now considered greenwashing. So these three types of bills, the first one being an example of extended producer responsibility, the recycled content mandates, and the labeling requirements have really entirely changed the game for what it means to have sustainable packaging. Before it was all voluntary, it was, aspirational, it was kind of whatever your company wanted to do or to commit to. And now the name of the game is really making sure that you are following the law on these bills. And they are quite ambitious. So I mentioned California and SB 54 as an example of an extended producer responsibility bill. But if you sell into other states, they have them as well. So 6 other states that you can see here in green with past EPR programs. Some of them are further along in implementation than others. And 6 more states attempted to pass similar legislation in 2026. so far. And so this is very much a dynamic trend that we continue to see for packaging, that more and more states in the country are requiring producers to pay fees on their packaging and to meet certain requirements for what is considered to be sustainable packaging. So back to California, just to give you a sense of what exactly is required by 2032, you can see some requirements to actually cut the total number of single-use plastic packaging put on the market. And then some recycling goals. So a fairly high percentage requirement for actual packaging to be recycled, and a requirement that all packaging put on the market is designed to be recyclable or compostable. So this is a very, shall we say, ambitious target for the industry, and everyone will have to work really hard to meet these goals by 2032. If you're wondering, does this apply to me? Am I a producer in California? There are some resources from CalRecycle, the state agency that is helping to implement the law that can help you, work through this. But I'm guessing that most companies on the call are in fact producers, and so this would apply to you. If you have questions, though, I definitely encourage you to take a closer look, and to reach out to, there's a lot of consultants now working in this space who can help you with compliance, reporting, data, and all of that. So I won't spend too much more time on, kind of California specific, other than also talking a little bit about the recycled content requirement in California around glass, which will, certainly apply to this group. So a requirement that 35% of post-filled glass be recycled content, which is, I think, for reasonable or achievable, but perhaps might be, a bit of a stretch or a kind of a project that some companies have to take on. And you can see some further sort of requirements depending on whether you're using mixed color, cullet, and that sort of thing. So in addition to extended producer responsibility, the recycled content, as I already mentioned, the on-pack labeling, what you say about your package's sustainability is also incredibly important, and is regulated in California, and it's also a theme for other state legislation. So I won't go too much into it, but for example, in Washington, if you try to sell packaging that has compostability elements, so if maybe there's a bag that is compostable, or a label, or some sort of adhesive or sticker, and you are saying that it is compostable, or your supplier is saying that it's compostable, it needs to have special markings and special symbols to indicate that to consumers. Otherwise, it's not compliant with the law in California, or in Washington. So there's different variations of how this plays out, but the big theme that I want to leave people with is that, if you haven't thought about this as another piece of the puzzle when it comes to sustainable packaging, I would definitely take a closer look at how you're messaging sustainability elements on your product's packaging. And I mentioned at the beginning our sister program, How to Recycle. So here you can see some of the labels in action. You can see a scannable QR code on the soup can, a couple of different tiles telling you what to do with different components on this box, the yogurt, and then the cereal too. So the program has been around for many years now, and it's used widely on all sorts of consumer goods products, and essentially has these components, tells you what the product is, if it is or isn't recyclable, any kind of instructions about emptying or washing, and then our website. And there's a French language version as well if you sell into Canada. And our goal with this label is to essentially do all of that verification and third-party data kind of assessment, so that you don't have to, so that you can continue to tell consumers that your product is recyclable, and not worry about being sued for greenwashing. We have the data on your package. You provide us with the data as well, and then you're able to make these verified claims. And the good news about continuing to message recyclability on pack is that many consumers really understand that chasing arrows symbol. So if your product is recyclable, you do want to continue to tell consumers to recycle it because they have a really impressively high recall of what that chasing arrows recycling symbol means. And we've seen that nearly 84% of survey respondents that we've surveyed recognize the how to recycle label. So I would say don't be scared to communicate recyclability just because of these new laws. It's still really important to do that. It keeps the whole kind of circular economy of these materials going by ensuring that consumers feel confident to continue to recycle recyclable items. But it is helpful to use a symbol that people are familiar with and that has all of that data behind it. There's also a worthwhile messaging effort around recycled content. So we did some research on whether consumers understand what recycled content means as opposed to recyclable, the word. And kind of the bad news is that most consumers don't understand the difference or get confused between recycled content and recyclability. But if they are educated about the value of recycled content, and if there's a bit more of a story on the product about the how much recycled content is being used in the packaging and the impact of that, then it actually becomes the #1 sustainability driver of claimed purchase intent. So it becomes a really big selling point for consumers. So another thing to consider as you're meeting those recycled content mandates or looking to use more recycled content in your portfolio is to think about communicating this to consumers because you can get sort of brownie points, if you will, with them if done correctly. And we have some resources on our website for this. And then, of course, no sustainability strategy is complete without thinking about kind of the bigger picture, which is reduction and reuse. And these are going to be your long-term strategies that will help you cut costs in the long run and stay in compliance with these various bills and really just kind of get a leg up. So again, California is a big driver for this. All producers in the state will have to reach a 10% overall reduction in the amount of packaging that is put on the market in California by 2027 and 20% by 2030. And there's some specific reuse and refill requirements built into this as opposed to things like just lightweighting or elimination. So the idea is that refill and reuse are not going away. It's definitely a big opportunity, especially for beverage as a category, to meet some of the requirements as set out by California and other states. And so I wanted to share some examples of what that could look like. Maybe some of you have already seen these. They are wine or wine adjacent. So Ravino has been in the news recently for offering reusable glass wine bottles for the Oregon wine industry. So if you haven't heard of them, definitely check them out. But they are a great partner to explore to see if you can work with them. And then Eco Spirits, they work with spirits, as the name suggests, but it's an interesting concept that maybe we'll start to see in the wine space as well, with essentially these keg-like containers full of the spirits that are used in hospitality. I'll just close with the fact that consumers still have opinions. So even though the driver for sustainability these days is really about compliance with state laws, consumers still really have strong thoughts on what they think is or isn't sustainable. And one of the best sources of truth on this is McKinsey's recent survey. They found that recyclability was still a top priority across all, global markets, and that glass and paper were ranked in the top three preferred materials. So definitely a big emphasis among consumers on non-plastic solutions. So to quickly summarize the things that I think are worth focusing on for you all, first and foremost, compliance. So if you're not familiar with what's required of you in California and in other states, definitely look for partners who can help you understand the laws and get the data that you need to report to the producer responsibility organizations in the state. I would also, as I mentioned earlier, critically evaluate how you're communicating disposal instructions to consumers on pack. That's something that you and your brand really control and have a lot of, you can really do a lot of good there by communicating recyclability to consumers. And then thinking about how you'll continue to use more recycled content in your portfolio and looking for ways to explore reuse and reduction as ways to cut costs, meet the law, and also I think in many cases delight consumers and your supply chain partners. So we have a lot of resources on our website that go into these different topics. These are just a few on our resources page around, for example, using recycled content, understanding the various laws, looking at trends in the space, etc. So I would encourage you to check that out. And if you have any questions, this is my email address and I would love to connect. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. Next up, we have Gita Mallya. She's the Viticulturist and Sustainability Lead at Domaine Carneros.
Hello. Hi.
Let you take it from here.
Hi, everyone. So I'm here today to talk about Scope 3 emissions in the context of a winery. And I just wanted to start by saying Scope 3 emissions can feel like something that is very daunting and almost out of your hands. Can we go back one slide? Thank you. Yeah, to the packaging reuse.
This one?
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
So with Scope 3 emissions, it can feel like a very large and hard thing to tackle. And a lot of the changes that you make in this arena are very small, but they end up adding up over time to very large changes. So, spoiler alert, my whole talk today will be about communicating with your distributors and suppliers and also making those small changes because they add up over time and tracking those. So with Domaine Carneros, we have a packaging reuse program that has been around since 2010. And we are able to take our packaging from the downstairs disgorging line once we have our cases ready to be either shipped out or used in our visitor center. The ones that go to the visitor center are carefully opened. We've trained our employees to make sure that you open them with maximum reusability so you're not tearing the boxes in any way or damaging them. And so we are able to take those packages and send them back downstairs to our line to be refilled with the next line of bottles that are coming through. And this seems like a very simple and straightforward solution, but I think a lot of times reducing your Scope 3 emissions are pretty simple sounding solutions. So with this, could we go to the next slide, please? In the time since 2010, we have reused over 1.2 million pieces of packaging. So that includes the box, trays, and inserts. And we're able to use each piece around 5 times. And so this isn't just reusing packaging, it's also preventing our purchase of new materials. So it's also kind of a reduction, which is, in my opinion, key. So we're not creating materials that we don't need or are in excess. And so about a quarter of our packaging can be reused, and that leads to a more sustainable bottling line as well as financial benefit for us. So if we just look at the quick math here, like I was saying, the actual dollar amounts that we're saving per piece is very small. So we have $1.50 for a 12 pack case. And over time that adds up. So we have about $700 per month just from cardboard alone. And that adds with the inserts to about 3,000. And if you do the math over 12 months, we're looking at about $42,000 in savings just from opening our packaging a little bit nicer than I do at home. But I think a lot of people think of sustainability in terms of waste handling. So what to do with something like a package once it's done. But I think thinking about it upstream and thinking about how we use it, whether or not it's really necessary to create more or order more cardboard. I think that's a great thing to think about. And then when that prevention is upstream, you end up with a greater potential for energy reduction in the first place. So this is a sustainable solution that is not only saving us sustainably, but also financially. So I think a lot of times people are thinking about sustainable solutions in terms of having to implement something costly. And this is an example of someone on our team just saying, hey, I think that there's a better solution to just tossing these perfectly good cardboard boxes. And that comes from a conversation about what's happening. And I think that's how a lot of sustainable things are able to be implemented, is just by having conversations about what makes sense, and if just exploring options in terms of what can be done. Next slide, please. So we also have as an example of talking to our suppliers, we are able to recycle our label backings, which I'm sure many of you know that isn't generally accepted in the multi-waste stream. So we talked with our suppliers and we are now collecting that to the side. It's the same amount of steps to this box as to the recycling bin, and our supplier is happy to pick them up. I believe they reuse them as well. And so we also have talked to our glass suppliers and are asking them questions about the feasibility of engineering bottles that are lighter weight for sparkling wine. So in sparkling wine, we have another layer to think about with our glass bottles in the way of structural integrity, just because we don't want bottles exploding under pressure. So a challenge in the lighter weight glass conversation for us is making sure that they're safe as well for not only our employees, but our consumers. And also we just don't want to lose product that way. So over time, we've been talking with our glass suppliers to talk about different solutions for this bottle. But in all of these cases, we are also talking with our cork supplier to take our corks back for recycling. And in all of these cases, it's about starting a conversation with your supplier and talking about what's possible, just because oftentimes if you see a need and don't say something about it, maybe one person saying, hey, I need a lighter weight glass bottle won't move a supplier to create an entirely new line. But if 10 or 20 wineries are talking about it, creating demand, then maybe it will inspire the suppliers. So I think in the wine industry, especially because we have a lot of niche products that are made for us and a lot of inputs that aren't really used in other industries, it's important to talk to our suppliers about the value that we're getting out of it. And sustainability, in our opinion, is a value add. And so we are always asking what's possible and looking for ways to improve, and having that conversation with your suppliers is really important. And I think a great mentality that our team has around the sustainability sphere is that none of these new practices will be without their bumps in the road. So when you're implementing any new practice, whether it's sustainable or not, there are going to be moments that are hard, and people that don't fully subscribe to the vision or aren't convinced yet will want to revert to what you have been doing. And I think change is hard in any way, but if you meet those bumps, I think it's a matter of what questions you're asking at that moment. It's, should we ease into it more? Is there a step in the process that we need to support differently? Do more people need to be involved? Do fewer people need to be involved? And really asking how you adapt and refine to your needs, because sustainability, I think, is often thought about also as an extra in business, like, oh yeah, and we're sustainable. But I believe that sustainability is key to business, because if we aren't staying sustainable, is it really a viable business if it's only able to operate in 2026 instead of in 2036, 2046? We want to think about how we can maintain production through these years, especially as climate gets more uncertain, as supply chains become more tenuous. And I think asking those questions and making sure that we are working with our suppliers to create what we actually want is very important. So as a summary, it's all a team effort. It's all about communication, and the changes will look small and sometimes seem a little bit frivolous, especially collecting plastic in a bin next to our recycling bin, but it really does add up over time. And also on that note, tracking is just so important. We looked at the math earlier, and I think sustainability programs anywhere are the first to get reduced or slashed when we're thinking about our budget. But if you're tracking those things over time, even if it's one box of cardboard you're entering into a spreadsheet, it adds up over time, and those practices then become defensible to people that maybe are hesitating to keep it around, or to your CFO, to anyone that you want to show that it is making an impact. So thank you. That's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Gita. All right, up next we have Kristin. All
Good
right.
morning, everyone. Thank you for having me, and happy to be here. Um, we're I'm going to be talking a lot about working on some of this on as a smaller organization where we don't have the capacity to measure everything. So less is more, small actions, and they all add up. So can we go to the next slide, please?
Yes.
So as I was saying earlier, the challenges for accurately measuring scope 3 is resource limitations with time and money, and wine has a particularly complicated supply chain, and then a complicated distribution system. So trying to put all that together, especially with a small organization with limited resources, is challenging to say the least. But there's things that you can do that are just positive actions, um, that you don't like have to sit down and measure everything. So some of those things, in terms of reducing material use, would be choosing lighter weight glass, um, using less material, like no foils, lighter gauge stretch wrap, and use material with a high recycled content. So you're completing that circle, and coordinating trucking. It gets a little bit complicated, but if you have your incoming glass trucks come and time it so they can take full way back to the warehouse, it's one less empty truck on the road. So it can save a little bit there. Next slide. So for glass, what we did, our glass weight in 2021, our Sauvignon Blanc was 450 grams. Our Cabernet Sauvignon was 610. So by 2026, we are down to 404 grams a bottle and 470 grams a bottle. So our weighted average glass weight, we've decreased by 15% in those 5 years. So if you calculate how many tons of glass we didn't use, that's 135 tons. And it also, from a financial standpoint, it works out really well because you're saving a little over $1 a case on the Sauvignon Blanc glass and maybe a few cents a case on antique green. So that's something to take a look at, is like how light can you go on your glass? And it seems like there's a big shift in the market that lighter weight glasses, especially on this sort of more niche product, is getting more and more acceptable. Next slide, please. So we took a big, bold step in 2023 and stopped using foils on all of our bottles, including our high-end single vineyard bottles. So it's like, do we really need foils? And the answer is, well, not really. So that's like 4,000 pounds of metal per year that's not getting manufactured, ending up in packaging, probably ending up in a landfill somewhere. And also the significant cost savings for packaging. Next slide. So stretch film. We had an interesting experience a few years ago ordering stretch film. It's like 80 gauge. Do we really need to use 80 gauge? It turns out not. So we were able to switch to 63 gauge stretch film, less material, same protection. And also now we're in a situation where the stretch film can be recycled. So next slide. So with recycling, recycling is great, but California has in general a pretty robust recycling program, but many regions and municipalities don't. So that just sort of pushes us, like, how do we use less? And then the other thing to think about is purchasing supplies that have recycled content post-consumer waste even better. So things like label paper, glass, cardboard, all of those things can have high post-consumer waste content. And then we also, here we have a regional program called Northway Zero Waste Collective. And through that, we're able to recycle the pet liner from the labels, cardboard, glass, and stretch wrap. And then also, just ask your suppliers what programs they have. Because sometimes, like label companies, oh yeah, we can collect your pet liner. And I think another thing that's really important, especially in sort of a regional area, is collaborate with your neighbors. Because sometimes you can have like a pickup point for, say, stretch wrap or pet liner, and everyone can kind of, bring it to your spot, one pickup point, save some stops, save some travel. Okay, next slide. So I talked about North Bay Zero Waste, and then we are collaborating with local wineries. We're also collaborating with neighboring wineries for getting cork and cork-based closures recycled. So people will drop them off here, and then our closure supplier will pick them up, and they end up getting up. They're not recycled back into corks, obviously, but they're getting recycled or getting upcycled into landscape materials and like insulation type stuff. So the other thing I think is important to ask about recycling is like, what's actually happening to it? Where's it going? Because it doesn't really help if it's getting packed on a ship and burned in a third world country. Okay, next slide. And so a lot of suppliers we found have a lot of information about their sustainability efforts. Ask about having your supplies delivered in larger size containers or reusable containers like Gaylord boxes. Our glass manufacturer is local and claims an average of 45% post-consumer glass and up to 75%. If you're using Flint, it's going to probably have less recycled content, but it still has to meet the California minimum of 35%. And like I said earlier, corks are consolidated with neighbors and returned to the supplier where they're ground and donated or sold. And corks are not, contrary to popular belief, corks aren't really compostable. I've had some in my compost pile for probably 5 years. They're still there. Okay, next slide, please. One thing I think we have to try to figure out is labels are not, from what I understand, not recyclable. Some suppliers offer post-consumer waste label paper, but because of the coatings on the paper, those paper labels are not recyclable. However, the pet liner can be collected and from the pressure-sensitive labels for recycling. Next, please. A couple other things, barrels. This is all kind of random. One of our barrel suppliers did a big scope 3 analysis and found that the hoops were one of the biggest contributors to scope 3 emissions. So ordering barrels with 6 hoops instead of 8 can be a positive step. Grape delivery and fruit processing, just try to make it efficient. Have your fruit come in cool. That way you use less energy for cooling, and have the deliveries come in efficient. Load sizes when possible, just so you have less trucks on the road. We also start earlier. Like our cellar crew works from 6 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. And our most expensive electricity is 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. So that helps a little bit there. And again, coordinate your trucking as much as possible. Glass trucks bring in empty glass, leave with a load of full ware. When someone's dropping off grapes, pick up empty bins at the time when they drop them off, if that's possible. Um, so next, I think that might be it. Okay, so with talking with your supply chain partners, most people seem to have sustainability statements, as I said before, and some will offer tours, so it's kind of fun to go and see what they're doing and how they're managing things. Ask a supplier what do they need to make, what you need to make your operation more efficient, and learn about your supplier's processes so you can work together to optimize efficiency. And then try to figure out ways to use less material. I mean, recycling's a piece of the puzzle, but if we can use less and reuse, then there's less energy, less trucking, less greenhouse gases involved. And then for smaller organizations, you might not necessarily need to have a big formal purchasing policy because you just don't have as many layers. So the people that are making the wine are also organizing purchasing glass, for example. So, but it's still important to communicate your company's size to the supplier. Next, please. And there we are. Bottles without foils.
All right, thank you, Kristin. We're going to have our speakers come back on video. If our speakers want to all turn their screens back on. Okay, great. Let's see. Lisa, did we have any Q&A that should happen? If not, I've got some questions that I would like to ask our panelists.
Yeah, there's one question about from Peter Work asking about thoughts around bottle reusing, like Ravino. And I don't know, I know obviously, Olga, you talked about that, but if there's anything else to share.
Um, I'm personally super curious about the whole bottle reuse thing, and I think it's been really successful and sort of like regionally in Oregon. But at a certain size, it's like, how do you get enough of that glass? I think there's a limited supply of the reusable bottles, and how do you get enough of that in one space? Um, and then I don't know what the bottle weight is. I think they have to be a little bit heavier. But
Yeah.
at least in Oregon, I think it's been successful.
I'll just add that I know there was a California-based wine reuse program. Now I'm blanking on the name. Maybe someone here is on the call is familiar with them. But they unfortunately went out of business. So I think it is a really interesting space to watch. A couple of years ago, reuse and refill were very much voluntary, and so that's part of the reason why I think those kinds of companies struggle to make a profit or to gain traction with a wide market. But now that it's part of the state law and that there's those specific requirements and targets in place, it'll be interesting to see if those programs are more effective and have more just kind of are more stable and something that feels less risky for brands to participate in. And the other just brief thing I'll say about reuse is that there was some news a couple of weeks ago on a new reuse symbol that was launched as part of this international effort to create standard language and like a broader standard around reuse and refill. And so if anyone is considering reuse, I would look into that and try to use that symbol so that we can kind of have everyone on the same page using that shared symbology so that it starts to build that same equity that the recycling logo has.
Yeah. And then
Another reuse, of course, is kegs.
Yeah.
which we do a small number of kegs, but that's becoming a bigger, it's not big, but it's becoming a bigger part of our program.
Yeah. And then Peter, I'll just add that in our at our U.S. Sustainable Wine Growing Summit in Walla Walla, we had speakers on panels that are active in the Ravino program. Herb Quaddy from Quaddy North spoke, and as did um, Dave Markel from Willamette Valley Vineyards, and both those wineries are participating. I'm not sure that all of their SKUs are in Ravino bottles, but much of them are. And so I can send out that resource and point you in that direction if you want to hear what they had to say about Ravino, which to my understanding is expanding its offerings, not just in terms of the types of glass that it offers, but in terms of the amount of glass that's available to order from them as well. So. And then let's see, before I ask my question, I was just gonna double check to see if there wasn't another one. So I loved hearing about neighbors coming together to participate as a group in recycling, and whether it's stretch wrap or different corks or what have you. But I also love this notion that one voice sort of plants a seed with your supplier, but then 20 voices per se can sort of make change. And on that note, I wanted to ask you guys if, when you were having some of these initial conversations with your suppliers, were they on board right away, or was it sort of something that they had to come around to whenever you approach them, either about your sustainability goals and how maybe they could help you with it, or just in terms of getting them to respond to sort of simple requests like backcalling or switching to lighter gauge stretch wrap, what have you. So how did some of those initial conversations go? Did you find that you had to be persistent, or was it a little easier than you thought it would be?
I think a lot of suppliers are expecting some of these conversations just based on how our industry really cares about sustainability, and has cared more in recent years about making a larger impact and reducing our impact on the world. And so I think it always starts with like a casual conversation, maybe not always, but often starts with a like, hey, what do you think about this? Is this possible? And I think a lot of suppliers are open to thinking like, let me think on that. Let me talk to someone else. Maybe we can work something out. And I think that's often how it goes. And sometimes it takes a little poking, but I think that's where we all come in when it's more than one person doing the poking. Get suppliers to take it a little more seriously.
I would, I totally agree with you, Gita, and I would also add that it has gotten easier. I mean, I think suppliers are sort of more aware that that's a wine industry um, goal and it's important to us. And we've had suppliers say, "Hey, we're looking at switching to say craft boxes because they have more recycled content. Are you interested?" And we're like, "Yeah, absolutely." So sometimes suppliers are coming to us with their, what they're doing on their end too. Um, it didn't used to be that way, but it's gotten a lot better.
Well, that's reassuring to hear. I'm glad to know that. Well, we've hit our 1 hour mark for the webinar. I'll just throw it out and see if there's any more questions before we close. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. We will put this into I'll put it on our library and then send it out to anyone that's registered, and feel free to pass it around to your team members to watch. I think there's a lot of good information that we got here today. So thank you for coming and have a great day.
Thank you. You as well.